This is a series I've been wanting to do for a very long time. There's so many classic games that are almost legendary in the gaming world, and so many that I have yet to play. It's one thing if you love a game that you grew up playing and continue to play today, but how good are they really? What if you could play them again for the first time? Would they still hold up today? Are they merely legends of the past, never to be fully enjoyed by future generations? That's what this series is all about. I'm here to play these classics that so many people love. I'm here to find out if these games are so highly regarded mainly due to nostalgia, or if they're amazing even when played today for the first time ever. Welcome to a non-nostalgic look, where we take the classics you loved and look at them for the first time ever without any bit of nostalgia. Vi for the Sega CD is a game I've had for a very long time, but never got around to finishing it. I finally played through it all this year, and honestly, I'm impressed. So let's get started. Vi is one of the few JRPGs I have played on the Sega CD, and they all kind of have this same look to them. It's weird because the Sega CD should look far better than the Super NES's graphics, but instead, these games are always really, gray. I get it, they saved all the disk space for the anime-style cutscenes and the incredible music, but still. On an add-on like the Sega CD, the game should at least look better than something like Shining Force, but for the most part, it's similar or even worse looking. I love the character sprites, and the world map itself is decent enough, but a lot of the monster designs and the animated cutscenes look pretty awful. I get that this is one of the earliest games to have these fully animated cutscenes, but if they're going to look this bad, just leave them as stills like Ninja Gaiden did on the NES. On the other hand, the music in this game is fucking fantastic. The quality of the sound and the music itself is top tier. There's so many good tracks, and honestly, the voice acting isn't half bad either. With the music being so good, it's a shame I have to give the graphics and sound a lower score of 6 out of 10. Vi has a pretty well developed world, to be honest. Every single country you go to is always referencing the other countries, and each one has its purpose. There was only one really shitty town near the end that literally had nothing going for it. The other thing I liked was how the NPCs were for the most part pretty well done. You have guys that'll trick you into opening up treasure chests that'll suck all your gold away, and people that hate some of the main cast because they refuse to pay their bar tab. I always enjoy when the NPCs have a bit more depth. My biggest gripe, however, is that almost all of these Sega CD RPGs avoid full world travel completely. You'll never get an airship to traverse the whole world. You're always sectioned off into the country you're currently in, making it almost impossible to go back to the previous places. You even get a dragon you can ride, but he can only fly you to one specific place. That's a huge downside that could have been easily fixed. Even Dragon Warrior 3 and Final Fantasy on the NES have full world travel. Due to this, I gave Vi's world a 7 out of 10. It's greatly developed and feels alive, but also makes you a bit claustrophobic because of the limitations. For the most part, Vi actually has some pretty good characters. I loved Sandor, his story is really well told, and his character is well developed over the course of the game. Pottle was also really well done. I didn't like him, but you're supposed to find him annoying, only to massively regret it later on. Rachel was definitely my favorite character in the game. She was incredibly strong and fast, and had some healing magic too, just in case. Her story was about as well done as Sandor's. Sandor starts off fighting for revenge, much like Rachel, but they both come to terms with what they're actually fighting for later on in the game. Lynx is another character that I loved right away. He's definitely the most badass bard character I've ever seen in any game ever. Dude can equip halberds, one of which is super effective against the final boss and really all mechs, so he's incredibly useful. And he also has the best healing magic in the game. But then you've got two kinda crappy characters. PJ is a very powerful mage who runs out of MP quickly, and her entire character trait is just, oh my god, I love Sandor! And the final character you recruit is Kinsey, who isn't bad per se, but she joins the party so late in the game that you really don't give a damn about her. She has good motives for joining the party, and can use some unique weapons, but overall, she's just kind of there. But it's not just the main cast that's so well done. This game does such a good job of making you hate the villains. Geel and Sedul are so well done, they might just be the best designed and developed characters in the entire game. Sedul is such a conniving prick. All these reasons are why I decided to go with an 8 out of 10 when it comes to Vi's characters. Vi is a fairly difficult game. In fact, I would say this is one of the hardest JRPGs I've ever played. If you're like me and you actually enjoy grinding, it won't be too bad. But expect to set aside 2 to 3 hours of your time throughout the game, solely dedicated to grinding. I did most of my grinding in the second last castle, which made the final castle and final boss fight tolerable. But I've heard from others that don't like grinding say that the final boss is almost impossible to beat. This is also one of those games where half the bosses are so tough. There were times when each random encounter in a dungeon was just as strong as a boss fight would be in other JRPGs. A lot of the time, in order to be able to beat the boss, I would have to flee from every single battle in the dungeon in order to make it to the boss with decent HP, MP, and healing items. This game isn't for people who don't enjoy grinding and can't take out tough bosses in JRPGs, so I had to give it a 4 out of 10 for its difficulty. It's just so unnaturally unbalanced throughout most of the game. To me, good difficulty in a JRPG is when most of the grinding is done naturally through story progression, but in Vi, there's just way too much stopping to grind. If there's one thing I think Vi really excels at, it's telling its story. From start to finish, this game does an amazing job of giving you more and more reasons to absolutely hate the villains. Right off the bat, the game opens up with Sandor and Alin in the process of getting married, when all of a sudden these mechs and airships start dropping from the sky. The castle and almost everyone in it, including Sandor's parents, the king and queen, are murdered, and Alin has gone missing. Why did this happen? Where's Alin? Why did they take her? And how did they have these mechs in a fantasy medieval world? All these questions and more are what drive you to progress through the story. The only thing that really holds this game back from a 10 out of 10 is that the ending sequence kind of felt a bit rushed. It was still well done and satisfying, I just would have liked to have seen a bit more to the ending, so I gave it a 9 out of 10 for its story. The gameplay in Vi is pretty damn good. With the nice variety in characters, they all have their strengths and weaknesses, which you must use to your advantage in battle. Another nice thing is, despite the difficulty and need to grind, the game has a really well made auto battle system for the most part. If you're cool with just hanging out and watching a friend stream on Twitch or watching some YouTube videos while grinding, it's really nice and easy to do. It makes those extra hours of grinding go by quite nicely. The variety of different spells and abilities and even weapon types is also nice to see. A lot of weapons are super effective and weak against certain enemies, same with elemental attacks, so you can gear up according to the area you're in to gain an advantage. The game has you fighting a lot of mechs near the end of the game, so Lynx's Beam Lancer or whatever does massive amounts of damage to these guys, which is awesome. Probably the only crappy thing about the gameplay is, again, the massive amounts of grinding that's required in this game. And the fact that a lot of your mages just don't seem to come with a lot of MP, making them completely useless about 50 to 60% of the time. I gave Vi's gameplay an 8 out of 10. Overall, Vi was a really enjoyable game. If you could tone down the difficulty in places and even out the grind, I know it could be a 9 out of 10 game. But due to its issues with bosses being super hard out of nowhere, and even some regular encounters being able to party wipe you without notice, I gave Vi a solid 7 out of 10. Like Breath of Fire, this isn't the greatest RPG you'll ever play, but it's definitely worth playing for the story, characters, and gameplay. If you do play this game, there are a few dungeons I would highly recommend checking out a guide or map for, because it can get a bit mazy in 2 or 3 of them. There's also a mobile version of the game that I haven't played yet, but I've heard is good, and it might balance out the difficulty a bit, so check that out. All in all, I'm so happy that I finally got around to playing this gem. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this non-nostalgic look at Vi. If you haven't yet, please give this video a like and give me a subscribe. You can also join me at least 3 nights a week on Twitch at twitch.tv/Dookie03. I've also been streaming some Mega Man and Dragon Quest X on Saturdays. Thanks again, I hope to see you soon.